Welcome to Emergency Preparedness, Challenges, Best Practices, and How to Coordinate with Emergency Responders. My name is Stacy Meyer, and I'm the Vice President at CENTEGIX, today's webinar sponsor. And with me are our presenters, Chief Jeri Williams, former Phoenix Chief of Police, and Mr. Mark Wood, who leads our government group at CENTEGIX. I'd like to ask you both to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your experience with emergency preparedness and response. Chief Williams, why don't you go ahead and go first?
So hi, Stacy and Mark, good to be with you on this webinar. And to our participants, thank you so much for taking the time to be prepared for whatever event is coming your way. So 33-year law enforcement professional, was a chief of police in 2 different cities, Oxnard, California for 6 years, Phoenix PD for 6, born and raised and grew up in the Phoenix Police Department. Tried my hand in California to be a police chief and it worked out for me. Came back home, led our agency. When you think about the 5th largest city in the nation, and I know Mark can attest to this too, not only do we have planned events, but we also have those unplanned events. And quite frankly, being prepared for something is being better than just looking through a book or case files on what could happen. The irony of being prepared is sometimes in our minds, we think we know what we're going to do and how we're going to react. And it's not until that the moment happens that you really get to test either your reps, meaning the number of times you've been through practice, or you find the gaps. So I'm just thrilled to be here with you all today. Looking forward to the conversations and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mark.
Yes, Stacy, Chief, good to be with you both and our audience as well. So like you, Chief, 33-year long career in law enforcement. I know I don't look that old. I know, but
no, you don't look that old.
Okay. Well, it's 33-year long career in law enforcement. Started my career in the Houston Police Department a long time ago. Was a Houston police officer for 5 years and then married my wife who was from Indianapolis, took me there and ended up retiring in 2016. During my law enforcement career, I had an opportunity to do a little bit of everything. I was very, very fortunate to do everything. Obviously, Chief, you know, you start as a patrol officer, but, you know, retired as Chief's executive officer, been involved in very a wide array of activities in law enforcement. And of course, emergency preparedness is a part of that. And, you know, quick anecdotal story, I'll never forget, one of the things that we had to deal with in Indianapolis some years ago was a series of tornadoes that came through, right? Wow. And so we had a massive destruction on the east side of town. And that's one example where emergency preparedness absolutely paid off. We, you know, in conjunction with police, fire department, EMS, I mean, we really did I think, a very stellar job in that. So that really reiterated to me the absolute importance of emergency preparedness. So I'm glad that our audience is here. And hopefully we can impart some information from our experiences that's going to help you in developing your own preparedness plans.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. So the areas we'll be covering on the agenda today: understanding emergency preparedness, perspectives from law enforcement, and solutions for emergency preparedness. And we'll just get started with understanding emergency preparedness. Be ready in your roles to combat, broadly speaking, some of the most common types of emergencies: fire, medical issues, hazardous chemical leaks, bomb threats, workplace violence, severe weather, as Mark just was describing, power or utility failures, and natural disasters. And despite every preventative measure that you may have put in place, nothing will change the fact that emergencies will still happen. From the everyday to the extreme, people who work in your facilities have an expectation that you have a plan for what to do when and if there is an emergency. Here are some of the most common barriers that you as facility managers are likely to face during emergency situations, from communication breakdowns to access control needs, system failures, and keeping your personnel, your facilities team safe. Chief Williams, you have a great deal of experience on the response side of emergencies. We would love to hear from you on some of the best practices for those overseeing preparedness on the facility side. Let's start with the importance of emergency preparedness itself.
So Stacy, thank you so much for that. You can look on the screen and see that there is a checklist. Most facilities, entities, cities, businesses have a book on a shelf somewhere, because I'm a little bit old school. You have a book on a shelf. It's probably a 3-ring binder. It could be red for emergencies. It could be a different color. Kind of draw your eyes to it at first. If during the emergency is the first time that you've looked at this book, you are too late. Looking at that book during the emergency, because you get in tunnel vision, because you're in stress mode and you may not even know that you're being stressed, you may forget some things. So pick that book up off the shelf, take a look at it, have someone like Mark or one of your facilities folks get with either police and fire and law enforcement, kind of a combination of all, to make sure those are up to date, because that's going to be critical. Secondly, for any facility, if there have been updates or upgrades to your facility that aren't listed in the emergency preparedness book, that is going to be a challenge for first responders and those trying to come in and kind of mitigate things. So making sure the maps are up to date, making sure anything that's been retrofitted is up to date and listed in that book. I speak for CENTEGIX when I say that there is an awesome mapping function that's available where we can upgrade the systems, and I'm sure Mark is going to talk about that later. But again, the first time looking at this book shouldn't be in an emergency. I mean, if I can go off on a little bit of a tangent too, you should know the first names of people whom you will need to talk to. As a police chief, I need to know who the fire chief is. I need to know who the water services person is. I need to know who's head of streets maintenance and division. I need to know who's in charge of the power company. If something happens, which entity am I going to call? So you building those relationships are critical, in my opinion, to the emergency preparedness. It's really nice in my business when either we had a natural disaster, because we do have floods and haboobs and everything that happened here in Phoenix where our systems are shut down, as well as flooding. I need to not have it be the first time that I'm calling APS or SRP and not knowing who my contacts are. So building those relationships over time, to me, is a great way to prepare. Also, the importance of emergency preparedness, not just from the boss level, but also to those folks who are going to be getting children out of classroom, making sure the nurses get to the right station and the parents get to the right station. Those folks should know each other too. So either bring folks together to talk about the book on the shelf that I talked about moving, and you all go through that as a collective group, to assigning times during the quarter or during half year when it's slow. You can have those tabletop exercises. I'm certain Mark's going to talk about that. Tabletop exercises where you're given a small scenario, and then that scenario grows over time, so you can get everyone at the table and in the group the ability to run through what their plan is going to be. I think last but not least, for our school systems as well as hospitals and city facilities, now that I think about it too, those folks that you have in charge have to be comfortable being the voice of reason when there's chaos. Meaning, if I have to evacuate a city building and I am in charge of the 11th floor, everyone should know that Jeri Williams is in charge of the 11th floor. And if she is asking you to do ABC, just do ABC. And again, you don't get to that unless you've prepared and planned for that, in order to be able to check all of those check boxes. And I'll pitch it to Mark. Maybe I forgot something, Mark.
No, that was very, very thorough. The only thing that I would add is to the idea of the training is that it just has to be continual training. You can't just, as the chief said, pull the book off the shelf when it happens, or pull it off once a year. I mean, you need to be continually training to your plan. And of course, the book on the shelf is based in policy, right? So making sure you have correct policy in place that meets the needs for wherever you are working and whatever your institution is doing, what their function is. But then just making sure that training is continual. Just, you have to continually train. It's muscle memory. It's what we call in law enforcement muscle memory. You know, the more you do it, the more it just becomes natural to you.
That's a great
So Mark,
point.
I think you bring up a valid point, if I can too, Stacy.
Mhm.
So even if your planning or your training is in small bites, those small bites start building, as Mark said, that muscle memory for you to know when you're extremely stressed and really bad things are happening and you have to act, that you're going to act appropriately.
Excellent. Excellent additional point. Thank you for that. So next up, communication strategies. How critical is communication and strategies for how to communicate to emergency preparedness? Minimal, I'm sure.
So Mark, I'm going to let you go first on this one because I have a little bit of PTSD on some of my communication strategies.
Well, the importance of communications cannot be understated. I mean, communication is absolutely the key for emergency preparedness, because as Chief mentioned about, communication in an emergency spans the gamut from one director calling another director, having access to picking up the phone and calling somebody in the utility space, but it's also communicating with your staff, right? And understanding what your message is for a specific type of an emergency, having that stuff planned out ahead of time and knowing how to communicate it in a very clear, concise way. One thing all of you in this audience probably know from watching television in the past, law enforcement has had this tendency to use codes on the radio, right? Yep. Well, after 9/11, there was this push to move away from codes and use plain English. Well, that translates into your world as well. I would suggest developing a communication plan that's clear, concise, doesn't use codes, doesn't use specific language, uses very common language that expresses a thought, a need, a desire, a movement in a very, very concise and clear way. So, and of course, communication is happening by radio, communication is happening by telephone, communication is happening one-to-one, person-to-person on a floor. So you need to be able to have a plan and understand what those communication strategies are about clear, concise communication and with whom.
So Mark, I'm so glad you brought up the point about plain speak. Police departments have codes for just about everything. My youngest son is a Phoenix firefighter, and they have codes for things. And then I come to private industry, and they have codes for things. Yeah. Bottom line, as Mark was saying, clear and concise communication, telling people where to go and what to do, and not trying to give them too much to do. It should be 1 or 2 steps. I need you to go from A to B, and then stay and hold in this area, or go to staging, or go to command. Those things should be very plain speak. Also, you will find in an emergency that it should be one voice talking and giving information about what's happening during the incident. Don't rely on a text message from a kid under a desk at school. Don't rely on what 10 teachers may have heard or seen on social media. You should have already identified who that one person and that one voice is. For Phoenix, during our emergencies and or when we had Super Bowls and other events, there was one whole section for communication, and there was one person who spoke as the public information officer or the person giving the information. Find whoever that person is going to be in your group. Make sure he or she knows that it's very plain speak, how you're going to communicate. And as Mark mentioned too, I do things in diagrams. That's how I think of things. So Mark talked about cross communication, communication up, communication down, communication to everyone. Whoever that public information officer is should be that person that's going to touch all of those entities. In the city, we have to communicate to mayor and council. If you're in the state, you may need to communicate to the governor. If you're in the school district, you may need to communicate to the superintendent. But also don't forget, in any of our environments, communicating with the parents and or the victim's family. You need to come up with a way to communicate with them, and then figure out what a communications cadence is going to be. The media is going to come and they're going to try every which way to try to get information. Mark's dying because we know it's true. They're going to show up at any place. There should be one staging area for all media. And if you feed the media information at a regular cadence, they're not going to be trying to pick on the next door neighbor next to the school or the hospital to try to get information, because you're saying we're going to update everyone on the incident at the hour. We're going to update every 2 hours. We're going to update every 6 hours. So you'll get in a cadence, but communicate that up front so that that's already out there, and that gives you time to plan on what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and why. I think that the last thing for me is only communicate what you know. I'm going to repeat it. Only communicate what you know. Don't think, don't perceive, don't have an epiphany, because all those things will come back to bite you in the back end when the incident is over. And Stacey, please remind me to talk about post-emergency incident. because from a chief's perspective, I definitely see what that looks like on the back end as far as civil litigation, lawsuits, and other things. I really do want to touch on that to give folks who are on this webinar some really good tools to take away.
Okay, perfect. I will put a note there to remind me. And that sounds what you were just speaking about of only communicate what you know. It sounds so foundational and elemental, yet I'm
Right.
sure it's one of the harder things for most to accomplish.
Well, it's
Stacey,
hard because if you're the boss, you want to have all the information, right? Someone is talking to you. I mean, we're all type A personalities, for the love of Pete. So I want to tell you, what I know. The problem with that is the more you speak, the more things get muddled. And when you find out later, or Mark can attest to this, what you see at the very beginning is never going to be the same exact way at the end. Been here 33 years. It always happens that way. So only speak to what you know at the moment. And it's very easy just to say at this moment, this is what I know. Mark, you were going to say something?
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I watch television, obviously, like most people do, and you watch news programs, and I see people that are very, very accomplished in their field, but they make that mistake.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, and I'm watching, I'm like, oh, I can't believe, he or she just did that.
Yep.
You can see them walking into that minefield. So it's easy the point is, it's easy to do even if you're an accomplished communicator and accomplished in your field. So it's something we all have to guard against.
Yeah, and thanks, Mark, for bringing that up. The only reason why I'm saying that, y'all, is because I've done it. I'm trying to keep you from avoiding that mistake, because it's very easy to say something when the smoke is still billowing and other things, and then when all the dust is cleared, it looks a little bit different. So we're just trying to help you all avoid some of the mistakes that I've made.
Was that the PTSD you were referring to?
Oh, sister, I got PTSD all over.
Well, I'm sure one or two of those examples will come in very handy for this audience. So hold on that. All right. Now, you both have touched on this briefly in some of the previous conversations, but attempting to follow a plan for the very first time while in the midst of an emergency absolutely increases the likelihood of failure. Talk to us about training and drills and how foundational to emergency preparedness they are.
So I'll go ahead and start. I know Mark definitely drills down a little bit deeper than I. If you are the boss or the second in command, planning and scheduling those drills at regular cadences and intervals too will help your team be ready for what's coming. I guarantee you 1000%. They're going to whine about why do we have to have this training? I can't take time out of my day. I'm too busy with a lesson plan. I have too much on my plate. I have things to do. At the end of the day, that should just be part of the indoctrination and building the culture of whatever organization it is, be it a school, a hospital, a business, a police department, a fire department, you name it. Those drills should be in place. I truly believe in practicing how you play. If your drill is going to call on someone to be the emergency manager or the person who is escorting people out of a building, in this video or in this picture, you see someone wearing a vest. Clearly identifiable markings of who is doing what is critical so that in the moment, people are going to be accustomed to looking for that vest, looking to see what's on the vest, and next, what am I supposed to do? I would not make those drills very long if you're doing it in a regular cadence. If you can get a couple hours in every quarter, even if it's nothing other than talking about, we call it debriefing. So debriefing what happened in the last drill, what worked, what didn't work, or what worked, what are our gaps, what do we need to improve on. I would strongly suggest too having what we used to call a scribe or someone who is taking notes, because in the moment, even in training, you're going to forget things that you've said that maybe those nuggets of information that people are going to need later. So having someone transcribe those notes and that information and then providing it to everyone is going to be critical to your success. At the end of the day, when something happens, it's not if, when something happens, if you've planned for these drills and if you've had training, it may not be perfect, but it is going to be better. And if you think about the time that it takes to save someone's life, those seconds matter. In CENTEGIX, we talk about seconds matter, moments matter. Those seconds will matter when it's life and death, and you don't have to wrap your brain around what I should have been doing. I've never thought about this. You've already pre-prepped in your mind what's going to happen and how I'm going to respond. Mark?
Chief, well said. I don't know that I could add much to that other than to say that when you develop your drills and your training, I would absolutely insist upon having active role playing as a part of that, not just going through the motions. Like you see the picture on the screen now, and they're escorting people down the stairs, but really develop a training plan that really is, involves role playing around what that emergency is. If it involves a medical emergency, make sure that you have people that are acting out the role of an injured person or a sick person, or if it's, God forbid, an active shooter type of training that you're going through, make sure it's as realistic as possible, because there's really no substitute for putting people in a position that they really maybe get their blood pressure up a little bit. They really start to think, oh, this is real, right? And then it becomes very real to them, even though it's training. They're now realizing how important the training is. And then once you do that, what I have found, Chief, I don't know about you, but in my police department, then you get buy-in, right, on the training.
Definitely.
People are like, okay, now I get it. This makes sense. This is real. And yes, I want to participate. So yeah, just incorporate as much as you possibly can role playing in those exercises so it's as realistic as possible.
So Mark, you also bring up a good point too, and that's the practice how you play, make it very realistic. At the same time too, if you're the instructor or the person putting on the training, you really want to set people up for success so that they build that confidence that when the bad thing happened, oh, I've done this before and I was successful because I did A, B, C, D. I didn't do 1, 2, 3, 4. So creating those successful moments for your team really helps them hone in and get that buy-in, Mark, that you're talking about. No one wants to fail, right? So create those dynamics and those skills where they're going to be successful. And instead of identifying quote unquote failures, identify some gaps. I would use the word gaps and not failures. I would talk about gaps versus what we did wrong. Really try to create a positive atmosphere and an environment.
Great sentiment. Great sentiment. Positive reinforcement is just always so much better going at it for people to remember and want to do it the next time. So great advice, Chief. All right. Another challenge facility managers face is controlling who's coming and going in your buildings and on your properties. Managing building access to ensure authorized personnel can enter while also facilitating evacuation or access for emergency responders can be challenging. Mark, you have some experience on this front. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, when you think about emergency preparedness, for me, it almost always starts with knowing who's in your facility, right? You need to know who's there. Obviously, you should know who your employees are, but if you're in a facility that has a lot of guests there, that visitors that are coming and going from that location, as schools often do, hospitals do in large scale, right? Understanding who you have in your building so are you evacuating everyone? Who's where within the building? If I have to evacuate this building, do I know that I've got everybody out, right? So having an access control program that allows you to know who's in your facility at any given time and potentially where they are in the facility so you can go get them, take care of them, account for them is just vitally important. So Chief, what are your thoughts?
So Mark, I'm glad you brought that up. Everyone who is in whatever work environment, most of us now have to wear some kind of lanyard and or some kind of badge. If this person does not have a lanyard or a badge, they need to be challenged. Now, I'm not going to say go up and, do a power forward move or something like that where you're moving people out of the way, but it is incumbent upon everyone who's in that facility to begin to ask questions. Who are you? Who are you here to visit? Hey, I see that you don't have a badge. Let's walk you over to the office to make sure that you're in compliance. We're trying to keep everyone safe. I'm a firm believer in challenging, but challenging appropriately. And the only way to do that is if you've had training in, what should you say? Hey, I noticed you didn't have a badge on. We're all required to wear a badge. Let me walk you to X. I think that's a very safe way. And if that person doesn't do that, obviously that should key in and hone in on that sixth sense that we all have, that as humans, sometimes we kind of dismiss. I can remember there have been a number of times as a police chief in Phoenix, I had almost 4,000 employees at any one time. And I would be at headquarters and I'd see some of the folks come in who had long hair and beards and tattoos every place. Well, they were my employees. They were just undercover people. But at the end of the day, they were all able to produce some form of ID and badge. But I think safety, I know this for a fact, safety is everyone's responsibility. And if something is off and something is different and you don't do something, you are going to regret if that something turns into something bigger. And I'm not, to the audience, I'm not wishing that upon anyone. I've just seen it happen. So if you address and mitigate things in the front end, you won't have to worry about it on the back end. Akin to that, CENTEGIX has a great visitors management system that's able to track where folks are going. And, you know, if Jeri Williams says that she's going to Mr. Wood's classroom and I went all the way to Mrs. Meyer's classroom, that should be something if you're looking at the visitors management system. So safety is everyone's responsibility. And those facility managers who are watching this webinar, that's also your responsibility as well. So help out your facility, keep everyone safe, know who's there and where they are.
And I think to the point of going through a visitor management system also provides you with that badge. So now you are credentialed to be there. Mark, do you want to speak at all to sort of the other interfaces through visitor management that really help you understand who's in your building?
Yeah, so without getting into a lot of technical detail, our solution allows you to actually, when someone is visiting, to scan a driver's license, does an instant background check right on the spot, so you understand what type of person is there and whether or not you want to actually grant them access. As the chief mentioned, they're going to get a visitor's pass. It hangs from a lanyard, looks very much like the CENTEGIX crisis alert badge. But what's important is that badge allows you to know where they are at any given time in the building or in your facility. And as the chief pointed out, I mean, it's not only super important to know where they are, but where they're not supposed to be, right? That's the important thing. It's like, we know where they're supposed to be. And as long as they're where they're supposed to be, there's no harm, there's no foul, everything's great. But when they go somewhere they're not supposed to be, that's when we need to start worrying. That's when we need to start thinking. So this solution allows you as facility managers to not only know who's coming in your building, but where they're going, and exclusion zones, no-go zones. If they're not supposed to be there, you'll know that, and you can track that, and you can mitigate that. You can challenge them, as the chief said. So, you know, it's a very powerful solution that I'm finding is really gaining a lot of interest around the country, not only in K through 12, but in the government space as well. Because you think about government buildings where people are coming and going, City Hall, prosecutors' offices, DA's offices, all of those kind of places definitely benefit from this kind of a solution.
Right. Thank you for touching on that. Absolutely true. And that the visitor management solution is part of the safety platform. And we're going to go next into the different solutions that CENTEGIX has to offer to help combat these common challenges that you as facility managers are facing. So we've talked about all of the different challenges and the barriers. And now let's talk a little bit about how the safety platform can help your organization mitigate the risks and be prepared for the emergencies that are simply unpreventable. The safety platform was purpose-built to reduce the time it takes to identify an emergency, notify everyone potentially in harm's way of the emergency, and then respond to the emergency. When you empower every employee in your organization with a crisis alert badge, they can take immediate action in the face of an emergency. As quickly as they can click the button 3 times, they can send an alert to a designated team at your facility who will see who needs help and exactly where they are on your campus. Every employee in your organization would wear the crisis alert badge on their person so that it's always accessible, whether they are in a warehouse, in the parking lot, or even in a restroom. And what's critical is that sending an alert will not be affected by a poor cell signal or spotty Wi-Fi, especially important if power is lost. The badge communicates on a private network that does not burden or interfere with your existing communication network. So immediately after clicking the crisis alert badge, on-site responders that you designate, which could include a member of the security team, most likely, a manager at the facility, or someone else from your team, can be on their way to help with critical incidents. Now, Mark or Jeri, would you, either of you, like to speak a little bit about the emergency response notification that goes directly to 911 dispatch or local law enforcement, and how that facilitates a faster response?
So, Mark, you want to take that one first, and I'll jump in on the back.
You bet. Happy to do that. So, at CENTEGIX, we understand how important it is that when that emergency button is pressed, that the appropriate people are notified in a timely way. So obviously you're going to want medical, you're going to want fire there as quickly as possible. So what we provide is a direct integration to whoever your 911 operator is. Will integrate that so that that alert absolutely goes into the 911 dispatch center. For those of you that may not know, that there's the whole concept around the country now of real-time crime centers, right? So that's an emergency response group that's actually monitoring things in real time in your police department. We can push and integrate that into real-time crime centers as well. So that way you're getting an immediate response. You're getting immediate notifications, not somebody sitting there on a telephone going, oh, I'm waiting for somebody to answer the phone for me. We now have this integrated directly into 911 real-time crime center. So you get an immediate response. And if I can add just real quickly to this too, kind of going back a couple of slides, Stacy, you don't have to go back, but let me talk a little bit about the badge, which really directly responds to what we're talking about here. There are a lot of companies out there that do this app-based solution, right? Where you have to have your phone with you all the time, and it's an app-based solution. Well, I personally, before even coming to CENTEGIX, found that app-based solutions for a lot of different things can be really a deficiency. It can be a problem. And the reason why is because, guess what? I may not always have my phone with me when an emergency occurs. It could be across the room and I can't get to across the room. I may have left it in my car. Or if I even do have it with me, I may not have a strong enough cell signal. I may be in a building where, as we all have been at different times, where you just lose your cell signal. It's happened to me just today where I'm at in the city of Atlanta, right? So an app-based system really, in my view, is just not adequate for an emergency that happens. Having that badge that's hanging around your neck, that's there along with your ID tag, it's never going to be separated from you. That's going to work, as Stacy said, independent of any other networks you have. Even if electricity goes down, it's going to be there. So you get the immediate response, you get the notification into the 911 dispatch center, the real-time crime centers. So you're actually making that connection, and it's following through full circle, so you get the response you want.
So Mark, I'm so glad you talked about that cell phone piece, because I was definitely going to talk about that. I mean, I've been a creature of habit. I've been tethered to a cell phone for the last 25 years of my life. It's just natural for me to always walk around with it. For some of our teachers, some of our hospital workers, some folks in business, it's just not the norm for them. Also, there may be times, if it's an educational situation, where the teacher can't use the phone. The individual who is becoming a threat to them is a student. I mean, I think back to my two sons, who were both over 6'5" and weighed over 200 plus pounds, when they were sophomores in high school. If they get angry about their grades or something, and then they come up and they approach a teacher, they're going to be tower over that person, and that teacher may not feel comfortable using his or her cell phone. When I talk about CENTEGIX to some of my peers, I talk about an and solution. There was a slide before this one that had the facilities person or whoever the security person is on a radio, but they also had a badge. To me, CENTEGIX is an and solution. You are now filling in those gaps to provide access to where you are exactly on that campus at any given moment. And a couple of slides back, Stacy showed you different places where a defibrillator may be, different places where there could be an EpiPen, different places where emergency equipment is going to be accessible and available closer to where you may be or not. Our first responders need to know that. First responders need to know, if there's a defibrillator on the floor, do you know how to use it? Can you use it? If not, I need to send in the EMTs, and this is where they need to go. probably akin to that too, as a chief, as a boss, I need to know what resources not to send. And I can give you a quick example of that too. So during the time of defunding police and other things that happened in 20 and 21, we were being criticized for quote unquote over responding. Prior to me retiring, we had an incident at one of our schools. I won't say which one because I don't think I'm supposed to, but anyway, local school that alleged to have an active shooter on campus because someone heard something. That then sprawled into multiple media messages, text messages, things on social media. So when it gets to be bad as law enforcement, I'm sitting in the cavalry. I have a SWAT team coming. I have everyone in patrol. I have all the school resource officers. At the end of the day, it ended up not being an active shooter situation. So hallelujah to that. I'll give us a hand clap. But we were criticized for over response. So create those environments where everyone knows where to respond, where to go to, what resources to send or not send. And at the end of the day, everyone's safer.
And we're going to show a little bit more how important location information and the mapping portion of this is in just a moment. But I also want to address, you mentioned gaps, and then Mark, you talked about some of the deficiencies with the mobile panic button apps. And I think one of the things that the safety platform does with the badge is it fills those gaps. It eliminates the need to think about how you're going to communicate about the situation unfolding. Protocols are put into motion fast. And then there's the additional options that are not offered through the mobile panic button, and that, which is the strobe lights that come on in the facility. So people have a visual cue of there being a serious threat to the facility. You can pre-program an intercom announcement to come out if your facility has an intercom. Instructions can be displayed on your desktop monitors so that everybody understands, here's what's happening and this is what we want you to do from here to get to safety. So your on-site responders are receiving the immediate notifications. 911 dispatch or local law enforcement are sent the direct communication, and they have that location detail with the campus map to get that response to exactly where it's needed. And we'll talk about that a little bit more coming up here. And right now, as a matter of fact, I found this really interesting, and I'm sure the two of you, this is old hat information, but the majority of communication during an emergency centers on location. That was news to me, but I'm sure, it's like, obviously, when first responders get on site to a facility that they've never been to before, how do they know where to access the building? Which door is going to be the closest to get help where it's needed? Once they've reached the scene, there may still need to be more communication out to the other agencies or individuals that are showing up. The fire may need that same location information, medical responders. So location really does accelerate emergency response. And then, talk to us a little bit about coordination and communication. So with the element of mapping and understanding, by being able to look at a map and know specifics, not just to, I've shown up at this address, but here's the layout of a campus. And as you were just talking about, Chief, being able to see icons on a map that can show you where a fire extinguisher is, a defibrillator, the things to help mitigate whatever that crisis is that's going on. Talk a little bit about the importance of that coordination and communication.
So, I mean, we can go back to during a scenario or situation, it is going to be chaotic. Someone needs to be the voice of calm. Even if you're afraid and you're mush inside, someone needs to be that voice of calm. So knowing where to evacuate to, if you're in building A. If you're in building B, you can't go to the same place. You're going to want to spread people out to create a dynamic where if the bad thing is happening, you don't have everyone in one location, that you have people spread out. Akin to that coordination, though, too, is making sure, and God forbid, I don't even like using this example, but I kind of want to use example. If you have an active shooter and I have to get the SWAT team there because my patrol guys don't have shields, they don't have rifles, they don't have the tools that the SWAT team has, I need to know where to get that SWAT team to. If there is a fence that's blocking a quicker access point. My guys need to know that, or my people need to know that. And that coordination of those resources, the updated mapping system, I keep coming back to making sure, because I've seen it so many times, especially at schools, because of funding and because of other things. You're trying to figure out ways to make your facilities work for the number of students and staff that you have, and you may not have updated what the mapping system is for building B. Get those things updated. We can assist you. CENTEGIX can assist you with that. But that's a huge piece of coordination. At the end of the day, if someone is having a heart attack, which is more likely than an active shooter or other things, I want to know where to send the emergency medical personnel and how can they get access to that person, and or during the time where you call and law enforcement or EMTs are responding, perhaps you have a teacher or a student or a security person who can grab that defibrillator and we can walk them through how to utilize it to best save someone's life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mark, anything to add to that?
Well, the only thing I would add is in the picture you're seeing right there, you're obviously seeing the floor plan. And as the chief so eloquently has talked about, response inside the building. But I would challenge you to think about how important that blueprint is, or that floor plan is, on that topographical or satellite imagery. Think about responding emergency resources. Now understanding what we call law enforcement staging, right? Where you want to stage your media, where you want to stage a reunification point, where you want to stage EMS so that they're in safe areas, where where do you want to stage your command post, right? Where do you want to put that? And so now you have a global view of not only being able to coordinate what's inside the building and how to respond inside the building, but if it's a prolonged event, now how to stage all your resources in a safe, efficient way around that location. Does that make sense, Chief?
Oh, I think you're on mute, Chief.
Sorry about that. Mark, you brought something to mind also. And again, I'm going to the extreme. If this is a prolonged event and it rises to a national level or an international level, you are going to have perhaps the president of the United States, definitely the governor, a couple of Congress people coming to the scene. So you want to have already thought out where they can go and they can be and give them the information, but also not get in the way of the incident and what's going on too. So I think those kind of things are definitely critical. I love this screen or this picture because it definitely shows the importance of knowing what's going on. And if you look at the screen too, it shows you the highway system, it shows you the parking lot. So when we think about location and coordination, I need to get to you. What's the quickest way to get to you? Is it off the freeway? Is it under a bridge? I mean, what are those quick ways to get to you? And because we had helicopters that we could land some of our SWAT team and other things, we need to know where I can land a bird, land a helicopter, land a medical evacuation helicopter, and those kind of things.
Well, I think it's just, the point is that these digital facility maps enable you as facility managers to communicate complex information visually through the dynamic alerts and the asset icons instead of relying on verbal or written instructions. And these same digital maps are shared out to law enforcement or for all of the responders. So they have that situational awareness that is absolutely critical in these situations. Now, Mark, you came to CENTEGIX from Fusus. So talk a little bit about what it means to have that integration with a real-time crime center.
Sure. For those of you that don't know, Fusus is a real-time crime center company that I was with. I was very glad to be with them for over 3 years as Chief Revenue Officer. And Fusus does something very unique, and that is to take disparate data sources that a police department may have, to include, computer-aided dispatch, records management, but also really any other type of input like private security cameras, public security cameras, access control points, and you bring those all together into a common operating platform. So now you're looking at things in one location, one screen, access to multiple data sets from one single login. The point is to get real-time critical information as quickly as possible to coordinate emergency events, right? So CENTEGIX is actually a strategic partner with this company called Fusus that you may not know about, but it's a great, great company that supports these real-time crime centers in many, many locations and police departments around the country. So, if we happen to be in your area where you happen to be, we'll be able to do that integration with the police department via the Fusus partnership, so that anytime somebody presses that button on the badge, it's going to go directly to the police department, that real-time crime center, and spin up all the resources you need to address that situation in real time.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Mark. Within seconds of someone in your facility identifying a serious threat, an intruder, an active shooter, with the push of the button on their badge, the platform sends a communication to initiate coordination with the external emergency responders and providing that real-time incident data, including your facility map. The map enables first responders to navigate the facility, just as we've been talking about, more efficiently and with a greater level of situational awareness. When law enforcement and medical responders are en route to the emergency site, they can shave valuable time off of their response by having that location information. And as a facility manager, you may be asked to conduct post-incident analysis and reporting by documenting incident details, response actions, and lessons learned. By capturing and analyzing data from the emergency incidents, you can identify areas for improvement, update emergency response plans, and enhance overall emergency preparedness for future events. And Chief, I think you had asked me to remind you to talk a little bit about this.
So thank you for that, Stacy. So for the facilities managers and all the bosses out there, at the end of the day, someone is going to review your work. And they are going to want to know at the 1 minute mark what happened, at the 5 minute mark what happened, at the 10-minute mark, what resources were called, how fast did you call? So having that scribe or some way to record what everyone is doing at the moment that it is happening could make the difference between civil litigation and or other lawsuits that follow and the success of your school, your business, your facility, your entity. So competent and constant record keeping is critical. You may not need it in 30 days. You may not need it in 6 months, but come 2 or 3 years down the road, if the more horrible thing happens, i.e. an active shooter incident, someone is going to look through the different steps, and you want to be able to articulate that you've done everything humanly possible to mitigate what is going on as quickly as possible, making sure you get all the resources that you need to get to the location there. So documenting sounds nuts at the front end, but when you don't have that documentation and you're sitting in front of a bunch of lawyers and other folks who are critiquing your work, and you're not able to show what you did, saying one thing is but being able to show it is something else. So I again, learn from some things that I didn't do well at first. But making sure that you document all that information, and then making sure it's in some kind of chronological order makes a lot of sense too. That may require you getting your press person, your facilities person, your water person, the police department, the EMTs all together in one room and talk about the cadence of things happening. But figuring out a way to record that and keep a record of that is going to be critical in saving you in the back end when it comes to civil litigation and lawsuits.
Great. Okay, so here's was just a better look at exactly how easy it is to add these assets and to sort of organize your maps that have been digitized and put into the safety platform. So once the campus maps are digitized and loaded, administrators can update the layout without having to re-engage an architect for every change to a floor plan, large or small. Administrators and other key personnel can access and update one set of digital maps with current and precise location mapping of every building and asset. And Safety Blueprint, as part of the platform, is the single source of truth that can be utilized by any of your teams who deal with facilities, asset management, IT, safety, or security. And then honestly, the safety platform takes that even a step farther and can really serve as a visual inventory of assets and equipment and infrastructure within your facility. Your team can add assets on the digital map, as well as details like maintenance schedules, service history, and warranty information. The maps can be used to plan and execute inspections of building systems, facilities, infrastructure, and safety equipment. And you can define inspection routes on the digital map, specify checkpoints, and conduct the inspections efficiently directly from the digital map interface, and attach photos or notes or flag anything for maintenance issues or follow-up. And this centralized asset management system really facilitates proactive maintenance and planning, and ensures that assets are properly maintained to minimize downtime and prolong their lifespan, all which works towards your emergency preparedness. You can click an icon on the map to reveal details about the asset within, including an image, the location, inspection or maintenance details, as I mentioned. And overall, digital mapping solutions provide facility managers with powerful tools for conducting comprehensive risk assessments and for emergency preparedness. And that's just really the power of mapping for response. It's that visual representation of the facility layout, floor plans, room configurations, and infrastructure details that are critical to those tasked with getting help there fast. The visual aid, as we've said, just enables you to easily identify potential hazards such as obstructions, emergency exits, hazardous material storage areas, or electrical equipment, all things that can really hamper the time in response, which is the most critical thing. So in summary, facility managers play a pivotal role in creating and maintaining a safe and secure environment for the employees within your facilities. Your proactive approach to emergency preparedness ensures that your facilities remain resilient in the face of potential threats and challenges. Do you feel like, Chief or Mark, are there any other things that we want to let these folks know as we're closing out the webinar here? Anything we just want to re-emphasize on emergency preparedness?
So Stacey, I'll close with definitely practice how you're going to play, set up a routine and regular schedule, make this the norm instead of something that's, oh my goodness, this is actually happening and this is actually real. So just make it part of your culture. We couldn't do what any of us do without those facility managers. Y'all don't understand and know how critically important you are to not just the safety, but I think the well-being of everyone who is in your facilities. You all know that the door outside of classroom 36, sometimes you have to turn it left as opposed to turn it right to make sure that it's opening. When Stacey showed the picture of the picture that showed where the asset was, those are the kind of notes that you can put on there if the door sticks, or if you have to push and pull, those kind of things that when you're under stress, you're not going to remember to do that. And that icon is going to tell you how to do that. So I wanted to give kudos to those facility managers who are watching this. You all are definitely the unsung heroes of all of our facilities, making sure that we're safe. So thank you.
Absolutely. So CENTEGIX is the industry leader in wearable safety technology for all types of workplaces. The cloud-based safety platform initiates the fastest response time for emergencies from the everyday to the extreme, anywhere on your campus. Leaders nationwide trust CENTEGIX innovative safety solutions to empower and protect people every day. And the platform is comprised of Crisis Alert, the wearable badge that we've discussed for incident response, Safety Blueprint, which is the intelligent digital mapping technology, and the Safety Network, which is what connects the hardware and the software to provide facility-wide safety coverage and a great deal more. If you want to see the safety platform in action or have questions and just want to understand how we may be able to help you optimize your emergency preparedness, please reach out to us at the website, on our phone number, or via email. And we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. Thank you all so much.